Hey everyone, this is Fran from the 5 Minute Modeler. The number one reason modelers quit the hobby is bad track work. Today we're doing our best to kill those track gremlins forever. If you've struggled with derailments, flickering locomotive lights, and want a more reliable and flawless track work, this video can get you there. Let's get going. Before I get into some specifics, I'm going to make a few suggestions. The foundation of your railroad must be sturdy and secure. Make sure you're placing your track on a flat surface without bumps or rough spots. Seasoned railroaders use cork road bed on top of plywood or the extruded foam on top of supports for the smoothest surface to start with. Second, consider the track you're going to use. Many people are buying sectional track. This may be okay for smaller railroads. However, the many track joints can eventually create problems. My preference is to use good quality flex track. These come in 30-inch to 3-foot sections and allow more flexibility in laying your track. I'd also suggest using quality turnouts. More on these topics in the video. The biggest problem is the rail joint. Rail joints must be connected with tight rail joiners. Also, make sure the rails for each piece connect without large gaps. Run your finger across each joint to make sure it is smooth. This seems like a simple thing, but more than one railroader has connected rails with the rail sitting on top of the joiner instead of in the joiner. Fix it now rather than later. Over time, rail joiners can loosen and lose electrical connectivity. You might solder some of your rail joiners if you have problems with stalling locomotives. This will, however, make it harder to separate those two pieces later. Using feeder wires every 3 feet or so will go a long way to preventing loss of power on the track. If using flex track, you only need one set of feeder wires per piece of track. Soldering the wire to the outside of the rail, then use suitcase or similar type wire connectors to connect the feeder wires to your bus wire. Also, make sure there are feeders before and after each leg of a switch. And watch the polarity. Mixing up the wires can shut your railroad down. If you're running long sections of track, you'll also want to include gaps in the rails to allow for seasonal expansion of the rails. Fill the gap by gluing a piece of thin styrene and shaping it to the rail size with a file. Let's talk about curves. Use the largest curves you can physically fit. Anything smaller than an 18-inch radius, an HO scale, and 12-inch radius and end scale not only looks toy-like, but will cause your rolling stock to overhang the curves and possibly derail. But don't go straight from a perfectly straight section into a tight curve. It's a guaranteed jerk. No, not that jerk. You will want to add an easement or tangent track to smooth out the transition from straight to curve track. This is a bit more detailed to discuss in this short video, but I'll put a link to this model railroader graphic that describes several ways to make these. Think of it as a smooth transition ramp for your rolling stock. It looks and runs better, especially at higher speeds. By adding styrene or wood shims under the outer edge of the curve, you will improve the realism of your track, as this adds super elevation, which, while subtle, looks more prototypical and also helps keep trains on the track. My third tip is about track gauge. That's the width of the track and the rails. Track gauge that is too narrow or too wide is a recipe for derailments. When cutting track to fit or removing ties to get the joiners to fit, you may create an issue with the track gauge. Use a tool like the NMRA track gauge to make sure your rails are spaced correctly, especially at rail joints. Tip number 4 is about turnouts. Turnouts, or switches, are where derailments occur most frequently. More turnouts mean more chances for failure. My advice? Keep it simple, especially when starting out, by reducing the number of turnouts. You can always add more later. Here are the parts of a turnout. The two critical sections are the frog and the points. The frog is the crossing point. If you run DCC, Powered metal frogs are realistic but more complex to wire and a short circuit magnet. If you want simplicity and reliability, use insulated plastic frogs. Finally, check the points. The point rails must sit tight and flush against the stock rails. A tiny gap here can catch a wheel and cause derailments. Debris or ballast can also foul the points, and this can cause derailments. Adjust or replace any turnout that doesn't close perfectly. And my last tip is around less track and less trouble. I've mentioned this before, but my philosophy is this: avoid the spaghetti bowl layout. Too much track on your layout doesn't just look unrealistic, it exponentially increases the potential for problems, kinks, shorts, and wiring disasters. Focus on purpose. Does every piece of track serve a realistic operational goal? If not, cut it. By being selective, you free up time and budget to make your essential track work perfect. Quality over quantity, always. So, how will I know when I have great running track? What is the true indicator? Well, try running a long train not only forwards, but backwards over your entire main line. That's right, if you can push a long train, especially with lightweight freight cars, over all your turnouts and through all your curves without a single derailment, you've done it. Congratulations. Building perfect track takes patience, not speed. You want to run trains, not deal with the frustrations that come from bad track work. Slow down, check your joints and curves, use your gauges, and simplify your track plan. Do these 5 things, and your layout will transition from a frustration machine to the railroad of your dreams. For you experienced modelers, what's your secret track work tip? Let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time on the 5-Minute Modeler.